Good morning. Thank you for the introduction, Paulo. So today I'll be presenting one of the final works I did for my PhD, which is the computational design of carbon nanothread-based nanoporous materials, supervised by Professor André Muniz and assisted by Master Vinicius Milan. So in this work, I'll basically do a quick introduction about carbon nanothread-based materials, the computational method that was employed, and present the results and conclusions. So the objective of this work was to propose novel nanoporous carbon nanostructures using as building blocks carbon nanothreads, which, as you can see, in these kinds of structures where you see red nanothread here and here. So here we have 2D materials and 3D materials. So the objective of this work is to evaluate the properties of interest in these materials in possible applications in composites and gas separation and storage. So carbon nanothreads are a recently synthesized 1D sp3 carbon-based material synthesized by high-pressure solid-state reaction of crystalline benzene, and it's a material of very high mechanical properties, very similar to other carbon-based materials such as carbon nanotubes, where we can see here both stress and rupture strain, very similar to carbon nanotubes. And these materials has a unique function that there are quite a few different morphologies that the stacking of benzene rings can produce, such as we can see here. And in this study by Xu, it is shown that over 50 possible configurations are stable. And these configurations all present very different mechanical responses, which is a great differential when compared to carbon nanotubes, for example. So in an earlier work, we presented the idea of extending these 1D materials into 2D and 3D materials. And we used this, and we used two approaches in order to accomplish this. One of them was to combine finite nanothreads together, creating meshes, such as this one. And the other one was to combine polycyclic hydrocarbon aromatic hydrocarbon molecules in order to create these basically bundles of nanothreads bind together by the aromatic molecules. So in this work, I'll be presenting an extension, an extension of this method in particular, where we can see here, we took these two unit cells right here, are both in this earlier work. They were both presented here as this one and this one. And we noticed that they were basically mirrors of each other. Basically, you take this one, you connect it to its mirror, which is this one, and you create a new cell. So basically, our approach was to do the same method, however, using replicated cells. So in this case, you take 3 cells, and you connect them with their equivalent mirror, and you can have these corrugated nanothreads, as we can see here. And taking a step further, we can combine these corrugated nanothreads with their own image in the z-axis, which is shown here, and we can create basically the unit cell of these membranes, which are shown right here. So basically, by controlling n, which is the number of replicas, we can create membranes with variable pore size. And this morphology in particular makes them prime candidates for use in gas separation, for example. So we employed molecular dynamic simulations, first using ReaxFF to analyze the structure of these materials and to evaluate the mechanical response under uniaxial tensile strength. So we chose ReaxFF because in our earlier works, we have found that overall the qualitative description of tensile strength is adequate, even if the overall values ReaxFF displays for stress and strain are overpredicted. Also, we employed the OPLS parameters for some gas mixtures and carbon materials to perform gas separation tests, which will be explained further on. Additionally, we used some choice density functional theory calculations in order to serve as a qualitative evidence of the transformations that were observed during the formation. For these methods, we employed both lumps for the molecular dynamics simulations and quantum espresso for the density functional theory calculations. So here we have some animations which show the mechanical response under tensile strain. And we can see here that these materials show a very anisotropic behavior. So when strained in different directions, they show very different mechanical responses. In the first case, when the primary axis is formed, we can see here that the structures, they tend to shrink in the opposite direction in a great deal, and eventually they fracture. On the other case, in the secondary axis, we show that there's a great deal of deformation that we can achieve, as we can see in the charts. And you see here that as we increase n, the number of the unit cells that comprise the individual strands, there's a great increase in the tensile strain of these materials, as we can see in this animation right here. So basically, you have to undo the morphology of the structure and then start to deform it the other way, which allows it to deform a lot more than on the primary axis. Overall, these results show great mechanical strength, high flexibility, which are very interesting for various applications. So basically, we noticed that these changes right here were observed as we apply uniaxial strain on the primary domain. And we can see here that upon strain, the pores on the materials, they begin to close. And we figured that we would analyze how can we control the pore size of these materials in order to see if we can increase the selectivity of gas separation processes, for example. So we ran gas transport tests, which basically we start with a simulation box divided by our membrane, one side filled with molecules and the other one empty. After a while, upon this side, and there's a barrier here, and upon the size being equilibrated, we release this membrane here, and we allow gas flow from one side to the other, as you can see here. And we use the amount of molecules that cross this barrier as a measure of gas flow, which we use to measure the rate of transfer from one side to the other. So here we have some results from these gas transport tests, and we can see here, first, the variation of the pore size for all the three main membranes that were tested according to strain. As we can see here, there's a significant difference of pore size as we apply strain. And as you can see here, as the pore size lowers, we have a very intense increase in the selectivity of these materials. So for the mixtures H2 and CO and O2 and 2. As we can see here, these values of selectivity are very high, for much higher than common materials and polymer membranes, for example. So we also estimated both what is called the ideal selectivity and the real selectivity. The difference being that the ideal selectivity, we compare the rates for simulations with pure gases. And the real selectivity, we combine the actual mixture in the same simulation and evaluate the rates of the individual species. And we noticed that there was a particular trend for all cases where for the first mixtures, H2CO, we see a decrease in real selectivity compared to ideal selectivity. and the O2N2 mixture, we see the opposite behavior. In order to realize why this happened, we looked into the surface interaction between the gases during the stabilization process prior to the separation. So here we can see that in the case of CO and H2, there's a different behavior when they are in mixture and when they are isolated. So we came to the conclusion that that this process, the lowering of the selectivity, was due to the fact that CO was preferentially adsorbed in the membrane and was, by fact of that, slowing down the rate in which the H2 molecules could pass the membrane. And this process was not observed here, both in the mixture and in prior simulations. The profile of adsorption is quite the same. So in this case, we see that the membranes adsorbed are actually assisting to block the larger molecule from passing, and by so increasing the real selectivity when compared to the ideal selectivity. We can see here, basically, this is the Robinson upper bound, which compares, for example, selectivity for a given pair, in this case O2 and 2, with the permeability for a great number of polymeric membranes. And we can see here that when comparing our values for permeability and selectivity, we can actually go across what was known as the upper bound. So we can see that there are, some of our membranes show both great selectivity and permeability, which is something very interesting and something which is of great interest for practical applications, for example. So in some conclusions, I'd like to say just that both these membranes show great interesting mechanical behavior, very high flexibility, and mechanical strength. Also, when strained, they undergo structural transformations that allow us to tune the characteristic size of these pores, and they show a great value for selectivity in gas separations. Overall, they show very great potential to be incorporated in membrane modules. So you can have multiple stage separation where you can control the pore size and separate mixtures of very various sizes, which is a very great industrial application, very interesting applications. So for more information on this work, please refer to our published work in the Journal of Membrane Science. Thank you very much.